The story begins in a quiet, idyllic coastal town where the Evans family, Michael, his wife Abby, their teenage daughter Tiana, 17, and their young son Cameron, 8, have decided to take a rare vacation. For the first time in years, they're stepping away from their busy lives to reconnect with each other and find some peace. Michael, a highly respected civil rights attorney, is known for his calm but strong demeanor. Abby is a psychotherapist, thoughtful and perceptive, always looking out for the emotional well-being of her family. Together, they've raised their children to be confident, aware, and prepared to stand up for what's right. This family trip is meant to be a well-deserved break, a time for bonding, fun, and relaxation without the usual pressures of their professional lives. However, the peaceful atmosphere is about to be disturbed by hidden prejudices lurking just beneath the surface of this picturesque town. It's early in the morning when the Evans family arrives at the small rental house by the sea, a modest but charming home with a view of the ocean and a small path leading down to a secluded beach. The air is filled with the scent of salt water, and the gentle sound of waves crashing against the shore gives an immediate sense of calm. The house itself is warm and inviting, with sunlit rooms and vintage decor that speak of simpler, slower days. Abby remarks on the beauty of the place as they begin unpacking, and for a brief moment, everyone seems to relax, letting go of the tensions they'd carried from the city. After unpacking, the family decides to take a stroll through the town. They walk down the narrow cobblestone streets, past quaint little shops and cafes, each with their own unique charm. Tiana has her camera out, snapping photos of everything: the architecture, the sea, her parents smiling together, and Cameron excitedly pointing at seagulls overhead. The town feels quiet and friendly, at least on the surface. But as they walk past a group of locals outside a small coffee shop, there's a subtle shift in the air. A few people pause their conversations to stare. It's not overtly hostile, but there's a noticeable tension in their gaze, as if they're trying to figure out who the Evans family is and why they're here. Michael notices the stares but brushes them off, trying to focus on the pleasant time with his family. Abby, however, catches his eye and gives him a knowing look. They've both seen this before: the quiet judgment, the unspoken assumptions. But they're determined not to let it ruin their vacation. Abby takes Michael's hand, squeezing it lightly in silent support, and they continue walking, trying to ignore the whispers and sideways glances. As the day progresses, they settle into the rhythm of vacation life, spending hours on the beach, playing games with Cameron, and enjoying the beautiful sunset. That evening, they set up a small picnic on the sand, sharing stories and laughter. Tiana talks about her plans for college, and Cameron insists on building the biggest sandcastle ever. For a moment, everything feels perfect, and the family is completely absorbed in their own world, seemingly far removed from any concerns. But that sense of peace is shattered later that night. After putting Cameron to bed, Michael and Abby are sitting on the porch, enjoying the sound of the waves under the starlit sky, when they notice something unsettling: a piece of paper tucked under the windshield wiper of their rental car parked in the driveway. Michael walks over, curious, but as he gets closer, he feels a chill run down his spine. The note reads, "People like you don't belong here. Go back to where you came from." The handwriting is crude, almost aggressive, and the message is clear. Whoever left this note doesn't see them as welcome guests. Michael is initially furious, his mind racing with questions. Who would do this? Was it one of the people they saw earlier? Abby, sensing his anger, urges him to calm down, reminding him that they're here to relax and not to let the actions of a few ruin their time. But Michael, who has spent years fighting against discrimination and standing up for civil rights, finds it difficult to let it go. He knows that ignoring this behavior often only makes it worse. Abby, however, manages to convince him to let it slide for now, at least for the sake of the children. They agree not to mention the note to Tiana and Cameron, hoping to shield them from the ugly reality of prejudice, at least for the moment. The next morning, Michael wakes up early and decides to go for a jog along the beach to clear his mind. The town is still quiet, with only a few locals up and about. As he runs along the shore, he passes a few people who stare at him with barely concealed suspicion. One man even mutters something under his breath, loud enough for Michael to catch a word or two. Outsider trouble. Michael feels his anger rising again, but forces himself to keep moving, determined not to let it affect him. He's here with his family, and that's all that should matter. Yet, as he jogs back to the house, he can't shake the feeling that they're not truly welcome here. Meanwhile, back at the house, Abby and Tiana are preparing breakfast while Cameron plays with a toy truck on the floor. Abby notices that Tiana seems quieter than usual, as if she's sensing the unease around them. She's a smart, observant young woman who has been raised to notice subtle cues, and Abby realizes that she may have picked up on the tension from the previous day. Trying to reassure her daughter, Abby brushes it off, telling Tiana that every small town has its quirks and that some people just aren't used to seeing new faces. But deep down, Abby knows it's more than that. Later that day, the family decides to explore the local hiking trails. They're hoping a day spent in nature will distract them from the unpleasant incident with the note and the suspicious stares. The trail is beautiful, winding through dense woods and offering stunning views of the ocean below. As they hike, they start to relax again, laughing and joking with each other, almost forgetting the discomfort they felt in town. Cameron is thrilled to be in the woods, pretending he's an explorer on a grand adventure, while Tiana takes more photos, capturing her family's smiles and the natural beauty around them. But as they reach a clearing with a view of the town below, they hear voices. Turning around, they see two police officers, Officers Johnson and Reed, walking up the trail toward them. At first, Michael assumes it's just a coincidence, maybe they're on patrol or checking the area. But as the officers approach, he notices the same hard, judgmental look in their eyes that he's seen from others in town. Johnson, the taller of the two, gives the family a quick, assessing look before addressing Michael in a tone that's both condescending and overly authoritative. "Good afternoon, folks. Mind telling me what you're doing up here?" Johnson asks, his eyes narrowing slightly as he looks at Michael and then at his family. Michael, maintaining his calm demeanor, responds politely, explaining that they're just hiking and enjoying the scenery. But Johnson doesn't seem convinced. He glances at Reed, who shifts uncomfortably but remains silent. There's an unspoken tension between the officers, as if Reed is reluctant to be involved but unwilling to go against his partner. "Well," Johnson says, crossing his arms, "we've had some reports about suspicious activity in this area. Just making sure everything's in order." Michael raises an eyebrow, sensing that this is more than just a routine check. "Suspicious activity? We're just here on vacation," he replies, trying to keep his tone neutral but firm. Johnson's eyes flicker with something close to annoyance. "Sure you are. Just do us a favor and keep to the main trails. Don't want any misunderstandings." He gives Michael a pointed look, and the meaning is clear: they're not welcome here, and the town is watching. As the officers walk away, Michael stands silently for a moment, his fists clenched at his sides. Abby places a calming hand on his arm, but the message from Johnson is clear. This town may look quaint and friendly on the surface, but underneath, there's a simmering hostility, one that's directed squarely at them. The next day, the Evans family decides to put the unsettling encounters behind them and focus on making the most of their vacation. They spend the morning at the beach, enjoying the warm sun and cool ocean breeze. Cameron is building a sandcastle, carefully piling up wet sand with his small shovel, while Tiana captures photos of the waves and the way the sun glistens on the water. Michael and Abby lie on a beach blanket nearby, watching their kids with a quiet satisfaction, grateful for these rare moments of peace. Just as they're starting to feel at ease, an unfamiliar car pulls up nearby, and a man in his late 50s steps out. He's well-dressed, clearly a local, with an air of authority and entitlement. He scans the beach, zeroing in on the Evans family. With a cold, critical eye, he observes them for a moment before walking over, his steps purposeful. Michael notices the man approaching and sits up, his relaxed demeanor giving way to alertness. Abby senses the shift in his mood and turns to see the man coming toward them. The man stops a few feet away, looking down at Michael with a gaze that's both assessing and dismissive. "You folks renting that house up the hill?" he asks, his tone clipped and lacking any semblance of friendliness. "Yes, we are," Michael replies evenly, not breaking eye contact. He can tell this man isn't here to offer a warm welcome. The man gives a tight-lipped smile that doesn't reach his eyes. "Just so you know, this is a quiet town. People come here to escape. Certain elements," he says, his words carefully chosen but dripping with insinuation. "We don't usually get visitors like you here." Abby bristles at the veiled hostility, but she manages to keep her expression neutral. Tiana and Cameron are watching, picking up on the tension, though Cameron, too young to fully understand, looks on with innocent curiosity. Michael, feeling the protective urge rising within him, decides to confront the man's veiled hostility with calm clarity. "We're just here to enjoy a peaceful vacation, same as anyone else," Michael says, his tone measured. "We're not here to disturb anything or anyone." The man's eyes narrow slightly. "Just keep that in mind," he says, his tone cold. Without another word, he turns and walks back to his car, throwing one last glance at the family over his shoulder before getting in and driving away. Michael watches him go, feeling a familiar knot of frustration tightening in his chest. He can see the confusion on Cameron's face, the hurt in Tiana's eyes, and it pains him that even here, in what should be a simple vacation, they can't escape the constant judgment and suspicion. But he forces a smile for the sake of his family. "Don't worry about him," he says, trying to brush it off, though the underlying tension remains. In the afternoon, they decide to explore the town center again. Michael hopes that by facing the discomfort head-on, they might be able to overcome it, reclaiming their vacation from the shadows of prejudice that seem to be lurking around every corner. They wander into a small, family-owned grocery store, hoping to pick up supplies for a barbecue they're planning for dinner. Inside, the atmosphere is subdued, almost too quiet, as though everyone is aware of their presence. The store owner, an older man with graying hair and a stony expression, watches them from behind the counter. Michael nods politely, but the man barely acknowledges him, his eyes narrowing slightly as he observes the family moving through the aisles. Abby tries to ignore the tension, encouraging Cameron to pick out his favorite snacks, while Tiana examines some fresh fruit with a forced focus, as if willing herself not to notice the stares from a couple of other shoppers. Michael reaches for a bottle of barbecue sauce, but just as he does, the owner clears his throat loudly. "You folks just visiting?" he asks, his voice flat and devoid of the friendly warmth one might expect in a small-town shop. Michael forces a polite smile. "Yes, we're staying for a few days. Thought we'd get some supplies for dinner." The owner's lips press into a thin line. "Well, let me know if you need any help finding things," he says, the emphasis on help making it clear that he isn't offering assistance so much as he's issuing a warning, as if he expects them to do something wrong. Abby, sensing Michael's growing frustration, gently touches his arm. They continue their shopping quickly, gathering only the essentials, eager to leave the uncomfortable atmosphere behind. But as they make their way to the counter, The store owner suddenly speaks up again, his tone sharper this time.
"Make sure you don't leave anything behind," he says pointedly, glancing at their bags. "We've had some incidents lately. Can't be too careful."
The insinuation is unmistakable. Abby's face flushes with a mixture of embarrassment and anger, while Michael's jaw tightens. But he knows better than to rise to the bait. With a calm, controlled voice, he simply replies, "Don't worry. We're careful people." They pay for their items, ignoring the judgmental eyes on them as they leave the store. Outside, Abby releases a shaky breath, her composure finally cracking. "I just don't understand it, Michael. It's like they're determined to see us as trouble, no matter what we do." Michael nods, sharing her frustration. "I know, but we can't let it get to us. That's exactly what they want." He glances at Tiana and Cameron, who are both looking up at their parents, unsure of how to process what just happened. Michael reaches out and pulls them both into a quick hug. "We're a family, and we're here together. That's all that matters." Later that evening, as they prepare for their barbecue, there's a knock on the door. Michael, already on edge, opens it to find two police officers standing on the porch. It's Officers Johnson and Reed, the same pair they encountered on the hiking trail. Johnson, with his tall, imposing figure and stern expression, gives Michael a curt nod. Reed stands slightly behind, his face unreadable, but there's a hint of discomfort in his eyes. "Evening, folks," Johnson says, his voice low and authoritative. "We got a call about some suspicious activity in this area. Thought we'd check it out." Michael's eyebrows knit together in confusion. "Suspicious activity? We're just here with our family, cooking dinner." Johnson's gaze shifts from Michael to the inside of the house, where Abby is setting up the table. He lingers a bit too long on Tiana and Cameron, as if sizing them up, before turning his attention back to Michael. "Mind if we take a look around?" Michael feels a surge of anger at the audacity of the request. They've done nothing wrong, and there's no reason for these officers to be here, let alone to search their property. But he forces himself to stay calm. He knows that any display of anger will only be used against him. "Look," Michael says firmly but politely, "we're just a family on vacation. We haven't done anything to warrant this kind of attention." Johnson's expression hardens. "Well, we've had reports of certain disturbances. People feel uncomfortable. I'm sure you understand we have to look into it." Reed finally speaks up, his tone softer, almost apologetic. "It's just a routine check, won't take long." Michael takes a deep breath, debating whether to let this go or stand his ground. He knows his rights and recognizes that they don't have a legal reason to search the property. Yet he also knows that refusing might escalate the situation. After a tense pause, he finally says, "If it's routine, then maybe you can tell us what we've supposedly done to disturb anyone." Johnson shifts his weight slightly, clearly not expecting the question. "It's just that. You don't seem to fit in around here. People are concerned." Michael's patience is wearing thin. "Concerned about what, exactly?" he asks, his voice steady, but with an unmistakable edge. Johnson meets his gaze, unflinching. "People don't know you. It's a small town. Strangers stick out." Abby, who has been standing just inside the doorway, steps forward, unable to hold back any longer. "So because we're strangers, we're automatically suspicious." Johnson's expression remains impassive, but there's a flicker of annoyance. "Mom, I'm just doing my job." Michael, sensing that Abby's frustration might push things too far, places a gentle hand on her shoulder. He looks at Johnson, his gaze hard and unwavering. "You've seen us. You know who we are and what we're doing. If you have a real reason to be here, then let's hear it. Otherwise, I think we're done." Reed shifts uncomfortably. clearly caught between his partner and his own sense of unease about the situation. After a long pause, Johnson finally sighs, conceding, "All right, but we'll be keeping an eye on things. Just keep it quiet." With that, the officers turn and leave, their footsteps echoing down the driveway. Michael closes the door, feeling the weight of the encounter settle heavily on him. He turns to his family, who are watching him with a mixture of relief and lingering fear. He forces a reassuring smile. "They're gone now. Let's just enjoy our dinner." But as they sit down to eat, a shadow lingers over their meal. The message is clear in this town: they're being watched, and it's only a matter of time before something else happens. The catalyst has been set, and Michael knows they may soon face a challenge far greater than they anticipated. The day after the tense encounter with officers Johnson and Reed, the Evans family tries to go about their vacation as planned, hoping to shake off the discomfort of being scrutinized and treated like criminals. Despite the heavy feeling hanging over them, they are determined not to let the hostility of the townspeople ruin their time together. Abby suggests a picnic at a scenic overlook she read about, located a few miles outside of town. The idea of getting away from the beach and the prying eyes of the locals seems like the perfect way to reset, and everyone agrees. After packing a picnic basket with sandwiches, fruit and drinks, the family sets out in their car. Cameron is excitedly talking about the view they're going to see, his innocent enthusiasm filling the car with an energy that feels comforting amidst the tension. Tiana is sitting quietly in the back seat, her camera in her lap, lost in thought. Michael notices her silence in the rearview mirror and gives her a reassuring smile. She returns it faintly, though he can sense the worry in her eyes. As they reach the overlook, the sight of the wide, endless horizon over the sea lifts everyone's spirits. They set up their picnic near the edge, enjoying the stunning view of the waves crashing against the cliffs below. Tiana begins snapping pictures, trying to capture the beauty of the scenery. Abby is unpacking the food, and Cameron is darting around, playing with his toy truck in the grass. The family starts to relax, laughing and chatting as they enjoy their meal. But their peaceful moment is soon interrupted. As they're finishing their sandwiches, they hear the distinct sound of car tires on gravel. Turning to look, they see a police car pulling up. Michael's heart sinks as he recognizes the two officers stepping out of the vehicle, Johnson and Reed. There's no mistaking their purpose. Their expressions are stern and unwelcoming, and they approach with the same air of authority as before, perhaps even more so. It's clear that this is not a routine check. Johnson, in particular, looks almost pleased, as if he's found exactly what he was hoping for. "Afternoon, folks," Johnson says, his tone barely masking a hint of condescension. "Didn't expect to find you all the way out here." Michael, sensing the underlying tension, rises to his feet, carefully keeping his expression neutral. He doesn't want to alarm his family, but he can't ignore the sense of unease spreading through him. "Is there a problem?" "Officers," he asks calmly, though his voice holds a subtle firmness. Johnson crosses his arms, giving Michael a long, assessing look. "We received a call," he says slowly, his eyes flicking between Michael, Abby, and the kids. "Someone reported suspicious behavior near this area. Said there was a group matching your description loitering around." Michael's eyes narrow slightly. He knows this game well, the vague accusations, the shifting justifications, all aimed at pushing him to react. "We're having a family picnic," he says evenly, gesturing to the blanket and the remnants of their meal. "Nothing suspicious about that." Johnson shrugs, but there's a glint in his eye that betrays his true intentions. "Maybe, but we've had a few complaints about visitors disturbing the peace around here. Just making sure everything's in order." Abby, who has been watching quietly, stands up, her voice measured but tense. With all due respect, officer, we're just here to enjoy the view. I don't see how that could disturb anyone. Johnson's gaze hardens, his expression taking on a sharper edge. Ma'am, in a small town like this, people tend to notice when something's out of the ordinary. His words hang in the air, filled with an unspoken meaning. To him, and presumably to others in the town, the Evans family represents an unwelcome change to their status quo. Michael's patience is wearing thin. He can feel the heat of anger bubbling up inside him, but he knows that giving in would only play into Johnson's hands. We're not breaking any laws, he says quietly, keeping his tone even. Unless you have a reason to detain us, I think we're done here. Reed shifts uncomfortably beside his partner, casting a sidelong glance at Johnson. There's a flicker of hesitation in his eyes, as if he's beginning to question the necessity of this encounter. But Johnson remains unfazed, his gaze locked onto Michael's with an almost predatory intensity. Why the attitude, Johnson asks, his voice dropping to a more menacing tone. We're just trying to keep the peace here, make sure everything's as it should be. Now, if you're not hiding anything, you won't mind if we check your car, will you? Michael's fists clench involuntarily at his sides. This is more than just a casual stop, it's an invasion, a show of power. He knows he has every right to refuse the search, but he also knows that doing so could escalate the situation. Johnson is pushing him, waiting for any sign of resistance to justify taking things further. Abby, sensing the tension building, steps forward, trying to defuse the situation. Officer, we're here with our children, she says, her voice calm but firm. We've done nothing wrong. We're just trying to enjoy our vacation. Johnson smirks, a flicker of satisfaction in his eyes as he realizes he's rattled them. If that's true, then you won't mind answering a few questions, he says, stepping closer. Where are you from? What brings you to this particular town? Michael exchanges a glance with Abby, silently weighing his options. He could answer the questions, play along, and hope they leave soon. But he also knows that Johnson won't be satisfied with simple answers. This isn't about gathering information, it's about establishing control, reminding them that they don't belong here. We're here for a vacation, Michael says, keeping his tone steady. That's all there is to it. Johnson raises an eyebrow, feigning surprise. Interesting choice of a vacation spot, he says, his voice laced with sarcasm. Not exactly the typical destination for city folk. Tiana, who has been standing behind her parents, steps forward, unable to hold back any longer. Why are you treating us like this, she asks, her voice filled with a mixture of anger and hurt. We haven't done anything wrong. Johnson's gaze shifts to her, and for a moment there's a flash of surprise in his eyes. But it quickly fades, replaced by a cold, dismissive expression. Young lady, it's best if you stay out of this, he says sharply. Let the adults handle it. Michael feels a surge of protectiveness for his daughter. He steps slightly in front of Tiana, shielding her from Johnson's glare. That's enough, he says, his voice finally taking on an edge. You have no right to harass us like this. Johnson's eyes narrow, his demeanor shifting from condescension to outright hostility. Harass you, he echoes, his tone mocking. I'd be careful with my words if I were you. Reed, who has been silent for most of the exchange, finally steps forward, placing a hand on Johnson's arm. Maybe we should let them be. John, he says quietly, glancing at the family with a hint of discomfort. They're just here with their kids. We don't need to make a scene. Johnson pulls his arm away, glaring at Reed. We're just doing our job, he snaps. But Reed's intervention has slightly deflated his aggression. He turns back to Michael, his expression still hard but less intense. Fine. We'll leave you to your picnic. Just remember we're watching. With that, he turns and walks back to the police car, motioning for Reed to follow. The two officers get in and drive away, leaving the family standing in stunned silence. The weight of the encounter settles heavily on them, the peaceful moment at the overlook shattered. Michael takes a deep breath, his fists unclenching as he watches the car disappear down the road. He feels a mix of relief and frustration, knowing that the encounter could have easily gone worse, but also feeling the sting of humiliation and helplessness. Abby reaches out, placing a comforting hand on his arm. "Are you okay?" she asks softly, her voice filled with concern. He nods, though his gaze is distant, his thoughts racing. "I'm fine," he says, though he doesn't sound entirely convincing. He looks at his children, noticing the hurt and confusion in their faces. Tiana's eyes are glistening with unshed tears, and Cameron looks up at him, his expression filled with questions he doesn't know how to ask. Michael kneels down, pulling them both into a hug. "I'm sorry you had to see that," he murmurs, his voice filled with regret. "You didn't deserve to be treated like that." Tiana pulls back, wiping her eyes angrily. "Why do they hate us, Dad?" she asks, her voice shaking. "We didn't do anything." Michael struggles to find the right words, feeling the weight of his daughter's question. How can he explain something so complex, so deeply rooted in ignorance and fear? He glances at Abby, who gives him a small, supportive nod, silently urging him to be honest. "Sometimes people judge others because they don't understand them," he says carefully, choosing his words. "They're afraid of things that are different. It doesn't make it right, but that's how some people think." Cameron looks up at him with wide, innocent eyes. "But we're nice, right? Why would anyone be afraid of us?" Michael's heart aches at the simplicity of his son's question. He forces a smile, gently ruffling Cameron's hair. "Yes, we're nice. And that's all that matters. Don't ever forget that." Abby, feeling the need to bring some comfort back into the moment, speaks up. "How about we finish our picnic? The view is still beautiful, and we shouldn't let anyone ruin this for us." They gather back on the blanket, though the mood is subdued. The food, which tasted so good just moments ago, now feels bland, their appetite diminished by the encounter. But they make an effort, for each other's sake, forcing small smiles and light-hearted comments as they try to rebuild the warmth of the day. After packing up, they make their way back to the car, the beauty of the overlook now overshadowed by the lingering discomfort of what just happened. As Michael drives back to the house, he catches sight of their rental car in the rearview mirror and sees another note tucked under the windshield wiper, fluttering in the breeze. His jaw clenches as he pulls over, reaching for the note, and he feels a rush of anger and frustration as he reads the words scrawled in messy handwriting. "People like you don't belong here." The note is brief but potent, a stark reminder that the hostility they faced earlier wasn't just a random incident. It's a sentiment shared by others in the town, lurking just beneath the surface. Michael crushes the note in his hand, his mind racing. He knows that they're not safe here, that this place, which they hoped would be a sanctuary, has turned into a trap of quiet, persistent prejudice. He exchanges a glance with Abby, who nods, her expression resolute. "Maybe it's time to call someone who can help us put an end to this," she says quietly. Michael nods, the determination in his eyes mirroring hers. He reaches for his phone, dialing a number that he knows by heart, prepared to confront this injustice head-on. The Evans family returns to their rental house that evening, weary and disheartened by yet another unsettling encounter. The beautiful coastal town they'd hoped to enjoy feels increasingly hostile, every smile from a passerby carrying an edge of suspicion, every friendly gesture tinged with condescension. Michael is normally a man of boundless patience, a trait that has made him a respected civil rights attorney, but even he is reaching his limit. The repeated intrusions, the passive-aggressive notes, the veiled threats from law enforcement. It all feels like a calculated effort to make them leave. And yet, leaving would feel like a defeat, an admission that these prejudices have won. After the picnic incident, Abby quietly suggests that they cut the vacation short. Michael, she says gently as they're putting Cameron and Tiana to bed, this doesn't feel like a vacation anymore. The kids are upset, and you're getting pulled back into a fight you didn't come here to start. Maybe we should just go home. Michael sighs, glancing over at Tiana, who's lying in bed, looking at the ceiling with a distant, pensive expression. Cameron has already fallen asleep, his toy truck clutched tightly in his small hand. The sight of his children, one quietly distressed, the other blissfully unaware, fills him with a mix of anger and sadness. He reaches out, squeezing Abby's hand. I understand, Abby. Believe me, I do, he says, his voice low to avoid waking the kids. But if we leave now, it feels like they win. They'll just keep doing this to other people, families like ours, who just want to enjoy the same things everyone else does. If we leave, it sends a message that their behavior is acceptable. Abby nods, though her expression is still troubled. I know you're right. It's just, I hate seeing the kids go through this. And you know Tiana, she's internalizing all of this. She hasn't been herself. Michael follows her gaze back to Tiana, who's still awake, eyes now closed as she tries to push the day's events out of her mind. They both know that this experience is affecting her deeply. Tiana has always been an empathetic soul, the kind of teenager who feels the world's injustices with a unique intensity. This trip, which was meant to show her the world's beauty, has instead exposed her to its ugliness. As they turn off the lights and close the door to let the kids sleep, Michael's phone buzzes in his pocket. It's late, but he knows this call isn't one he can ignore. The name on the screen is David Freeman, an old friend from law school who also happens to be the district attorney for the county. Michael had reached out to David earlier after the note on their windshield, hoping to shed light on the harassment his family was facing. Michael steps outside to take the call, the cool night air filling his lungs as he presses the phone to his ear. David, thanks for getting back to me. David's voice is calm but serious. Of course, Michael. I was just going over the details you sent me. Listen, I wish I could say I'm surprised, but this isn't the first complaint I've had about law enforcement overstepping in that town. They like to keep outsiders out, especially ones they think don't belong. Michael feels a grim satisfaction knowing that his suspicions are confirmed. So it's not just us. They've done this before. More times than I'd like to admit, David replies, his tone darkening, and they're careful. They know just how far they can push without making it look like outright harassment. It's all very insidious, but it's there. The officers in that precinct, well, they've got a reputation for selective enforcement. Michael leans against the porch railing, his frustration mounting. I don't want my family to be a target for them, David. But I also don't want to walk away and let them think they've intimidated us. Is there anything you can do?
There's a pause on the other end of the line. Michael can almost hear David weighing the legal ramifications, the bureaucratic red tape that could complicate things. Listen, Michael. I can call the precinct and have a word with the chief, remind him that his officers need to follow proper procedures and respect civil rights. But you know how these things go. A warning might help. But it could also make things worse. These kinds of people don't like being told what to do.
Michael sighs, a mixture of gratitude and resignation in his voice. Do it. I'd rather they know someone's watching than let them keep acting with impunity. Consider it done, David replies firmly. And Michael, keep an eye on your family, just in case. I'll make a few calls, but I don't want any surprises. After ending the call, Michael stands on the porch, staring out at the moonlit ocean, his mind racing. The silence of the night seems to amplify his thoughts, each one tinged with worry. He knows David is right. A warning might only provoke these officers further, stirring up their resentment. But Michael can't let them go unchallenged, not when his family's dignity and safety are on the line. The next morning, the family tries to settle into some semblance of normalcy, with Abby preparing breakfast and the kids watching cartoons in the living room. But even as they go through their routines, there's a heavy tension hanging over them. Tiana is quieter than usual, barely touching her food, and Cameron is unusually subdued, sensing the unspoken worry among the adults. Just as they're finishing breakfast, there's a sudden, loud knock on the door. The sound startles them, and Michael and Abby exchange a wary glance. Michael rises from the table, feeling his pulse quicken as he moves to answer the door. When he opens it, his heart sinks. Standing there yet again are Officers Johnson and Reed. Johnson has a smug look on his face, his posture radiating an air of authority that feels even more intimidating this time. Reed stands a step behind, looking more uncomfortable than ever, as though he'd rather be anywhere else. Michael can immediately sense that this isn't a casual visit. This is intimidation, plain and simple. Morning, Johnson says, his tone devoid of warmth. I thought we'd check in, see how you folks are doing. We wouldn't want any misunderstandings now, would we? Michael fights the urge to clench his fists. He knows this is a power play, a thinly veiled attempt to assert dominance. We're fine, officer. Just enjoying our breakfast, he says, keeping his voice steady. Johnson glances over Michael's shoulder, his gaze lingering on Abby and the children. Nice family you've got here, he remarks, his tone dripping with insincerity. Would be a shame if they got mixed up in something they didn't understand. Michael feels a surge of anger at the implied threat. He steps forward slightly, blocking Johnson's view of his family. We're not mixed up in anything, officer. Just trying to have a peaceful vacation. Johnson's expression doesn't change. If anything, his smile grows colder. Well, you know, some of the locals have been concerned. They don't like seeing strangers here too long. Makes them uneasy. Michael forces himself to take a deep breath, keeping his composure. We're here legally, we're not causing trouble, and as far as I know, that's all that should matter. Reed, who has been silent up to this point, clears his throat, casting a nervous glance at Johnson. Maybe we should let them be, John. I don't think they're here to cause any problems. But Johnson ignores him, his gaze still fixed on Michael. Just remember, we're watching. If anything unusual happens, we'll be the first to know. With that, he turns and walks away, leaving Reed to offer a quick, apologetic nod before following him. Michael closes the door, feeling a mixture of relief and anger. Abby is beside him in an instant, her hand on his arm. They're not going to leave us alone, are they? She says, her voice trembling slightly. Michael shakes his head, feeling the weight of the situation pressing down on him. No, they're not. They want us gone. They're just trying to push us until we leave. Tiana, who has been listening from the kitchen, steps forward, her expression fierce. Dad, we can't let them do this. We can't let them win. Her words strike a chord in Michael. He looks at his daughter, seeing the determination in her eyes, a reflection of his own sense of justice. He realizes then that this isn't just about protecting his family, it's about standing up for their rights, for their dignity. It's about teaching his children that they don't have to cower in the face of prejudice. Later that day, Michael receives another call from David. I spoke to the chief, David says, his tone cautious. He wasn't exactly pleased to hear from me. I got the sense that he thinks this whole situation is being blown out of proportion. Michael isn't surprised. Did he agree to back off? He claimed he would look into it, David replies, his voice laced with doubt. But Michael, I don't trust him. If anything, they might double down. As he hangs up the phone, Michael knows that the situation is only going to escalate. The local police see his family as a threat, a disruption to the status quo, and now that their authority has been questioned, they're likely to respond with even more aggression. That evening, as they gather around the dinner table, Michael addresses his family with a newfound resolve. We came here for a vacation, but things have changed. I want you all to know that no matter what happens, we're going to stand our ground. We're not doing anything wrong, and we don't have to be afraid. Tiana nods, her expression fierce. Cameron, though young, seems to understand the gravity of the moment, watching his father with wide eyes. Abby reaches out, taking Michael's hand, and gives him a small, encouraging smile. They are a family, and they are in this together. But even as they share a moment of unity, they know that the true test is yet to come. The Evans family is about to face a challenge that will push them to their limits, forcing them to confront not only the prejudice of a small town, but the larger issue of what it means to stand up for one's rights in the face of intimidation. The stage is set for a confrontation, and Michael can feel the weight of it bearing down on him. He has spent his career fighting for justice, for the right to live without fear or prejudice. Now he realizes that fight has come home, and this time it's personal. The next morning, the tension in the Evans household is palpable. The family has settled into an uneasy routine, navigating the thinly veiled hostility of the town with cautious resolve. Michael and Abby do their best to maintain a calm front, but it's clear to everyone, even young Cameron, that something is terribly wrong. The once peaceful vacation destination has turned into a hostile battleground, and Michael can feel the weight of his family's growing fear and frustration. They've done nothing to warrant this treatment, and yet they're constantly on edge, unsure of what new challenges the day will bring. The first signs that things are about to escalate come when the family heads out for a simple errand. They need groceries and other supplies, and Abby insists they shouldn't let the fear of being watched keep them confined to the house. We have every right to be here, Michael, she says firmly, taking his hand. If we let them scare us into hiding, they've already won. Michael agrees, albeit reluctantly. Together with Tiana and Cameron, they pile into the car and head toward the town center. The air in the car is thick with unspoken tension, but everyone tries to keep up appearances for Cameron's sake. Tiana sits in the back seat, her gaze unfocused as she looks out the window, her jaw clenched. Cameron, sensing the tension but not fully understanding it, remains silent. When they arrive at the grocery store, the family quickly gathers what they need, avoiding eye contact with the few locals who glance their way with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. Michael feels the weight of each stare, the silent judgment that has followed them since they arrived. He holds his head high, but the strain is evident in the tightness of his shoulders and the measured, deliberate way he moves. As they approach the checkout counter, the cashier, a middle-aged woman with a hardened expression, greets them with a forced smile. Michael returns a polite nod, but he can sense her discomfort. She fumbles with their items, avoiding his gaze as she rings up their purchases. The transaction is quick and silent, and Michael feels a momentary relief as they exit the store, thinking they may have made it through the errand without incident. But as they step outside, they see two police cars parked near their vehicle. Officers Johnson and Reed are standing by the car, along with two other officers they haven't seen before. Johnson's face lights up with a smug smile when he spots the family. It's clear he's been waiting for them. Well, if it isn't our visitors from out of town, Johnson says as the family approaches, his tone dripping with mock friendliness. Out for a little shopping, are we? Michael feels Abby's grip on his arm tighten as she instinctively moves closer to him. Tiana stands beside them, her expression hardened, refusing to look away from the officers. Cameron, sensing the tension, steps behind his father, clinging to the back of Michael's shirt. "We're just picking up some groceries," Michael says evenly, refusing to let Johnson's taunts get to him. "Is there a problem, officers?" Johnson exchanges a glance with one of the new officers, a young man who looks nervous and uncertain. Reed, standing slightly off to the side, looks increasingly uncomfortable, his gaze shifting between Michael and Johnson. Despite his partner's obvious hostility, it's clear Reed has his reservations about this entire encounter. "Oh, no problem at all," Johnson replies, his eyes narrowing with satisfaction. "Just thought we'd stop by and make sure everything's in order. You know, we got a report about a suspicious vehicle matching your car's description seen around town. We wouldn't want anyone causing trouble." Michael suppresses a surge of frustration, his jaw tightening. "Our car has been parked outside our rental house or at the beach. We haven't been causing any trouble, officer." Johnson's smile fades, his expression turning steely. "I'll be the judge of that," he says, stepping closer to Michael, his gaze challenging. "Mind if we take a look inside the vehicle? Just a routine check, of course." Michael's patience is wearing thin, and he knows this isn't a routine check. He glances at his family, seeing the worry etched into their faces, particularly in Tiana's defiant yet frightened expression. They've been pushed too far already, and this is nothing short of harassment. But Michael also knows that refusing the search could escalate the situation further. With a deep breath, he stands his ground. "Officer, you have no probable cause to search our vehicle. We've done nothing to warrant this kind of attention." Johnson's face hardens, his eyes flashing with anger at being challenged. He takes another step forward, invading Michael's personal space. "I don't need a reason," he sneers. "Not in my town." Reed shifts uncomfortably, finally stepping in to defuse the situation. "Maybe we should just let them go, John. They've got kids with them." But Johnson ignores him, his gaze locked onto Michael. He's not going to back down, not after being publicly challenged in front of his colleagues. Michael realizes then that Johnson is willing to take this as far as he can, to prove his authority and make an example out of them. "Fine," Johnson says, his tone icy. "If you're so sure you've got nothing to hide, then you won't mind coming down to the station for some questioning. Just a little chat, nothing formal." Abby steps forward, her voice trembling but resolute. "You can't just take us in without cause. We know our rights." Johnson's smile returns, a dangerous glint in his eyes. "I'd be careful about throwing around legal terms, ma'am. You might end up talking yourself into more trouble than you bargained for." At this, Tiana finally speaks up, her voice shaking but filled with determination. "We're not afraid of you," she says, looking Johnson directly in the eyes. "We know what you're doing. You're just trying to scare us." Johnson's expression turns cold, his eyes narrowing. He looks as though he's about to respond when suddenly, the sound of approaching footsteps catches everyone's attention. A tall, imposing man in a dark suit is striding across the parking lot toward them, his expression unreadable. It's David Freeman, the district attorney, who Michael had called for help. Johnson's face falls as he recognizes David, the smug confidence draining from his expression. Reed's eyes widen in surprise, and even the other officers exchange nervous glances. David stops in front of the family, his gaze fixed firmly on Johnson. "Is there a problem here?" Officer Johnson. David's voice is calm, but there's an unmistakable authority in his tone that demands respect. Johnson hesitates, caught off guard. He stammers slightly, trying to regain his composure. We were just conducting a routine check, sir. These folks, they've been causing some concern around town." David raises an eyebrow, his gaze hardening. A family on vacation has been causing concern. That's an interesting take, officer. And what exactly have they done to justify this concern? Johnson opens his mouth to respond, but he seems at a loss for words. His usual confidence has been stripped away, and the power dynamic has shifted. David glances at Michael, offering him a nod of acknowledgement before turning his attention back to Johnson. "I think we both know that this isn't a routine check," David says quietly, his tone carrying a warning. "I'd hate to think that you're engaging in selective enforcement, especially after the conversation we had with your chief." Johnson's face turns red, a mixture of embarrassment and barely concealed rage. He glances at Reed, who quickly averts his gaze, unwilling to be caught in the middle of this power struggle. After a long, tense pause, Johnson finally mutters, "Of course, sir. Just trying to do our job." David's gaze doesn't waver. "Then perhaps it's time to let this family go about their day without further harassment." He doesn't wait for a response, turning to Michael with a reassuring nod. "If there's anything you need, Michael, don't hesitate to call me." Michael nods, grateful but shaken. "Thank you, David." David gives him a small, encouraging smile before turning back to Johnson and his colleagues. "Officers," he says, his voice carrying an unmistakable finality, "I'll be speaking with the chief again. I trust we won't have any more misunderstandings." Johnson's jaw clenches, but he manages a stiff nod. "Understood, sir." With that, David walks back to his car, leaving Johnson and the other officers standing in silence, their authority undermined. Michael watches as David's car disappears down the road, feeling a surge of relief but also a lingering sense of dread. He knows this isn't over. People like Johnson don't take kindly to being challenged, especially not in front of their peers. As the family gets back into their car, Tiana lets out a shaky breath, her expression a mixture of fear and admiration. Dad, who was that man? He just shut them down. Michael offers her a reassuring smile, though he can't fully hide his concern. That was an old friend, someone who understands what we're going through. Abby reaches out, placing a comforting hand on his arm. "Michael, you did the right thing, calling him. It was the only way to make them back off." Michael nods, though he knows that David's intervention is a temporary reprieve. Johnson is the type of man who won't let this go. They've embarrassed him, exposed his bias in front of his colleagues. He won't stop until he's reasserted his authority. Later that night, as they sit around the dinner table, the atmosphere is tense. The children try to engage in small talk, but it's clear their minds are elsewhere. Even Cameron, usually so full of energy, is subdued, his gaze flicking to the door, as though he's expecting another unwelcome visitor. After dinner, Michael receives a message from David. The text is brief but ominous: "Watch your back. Johnson isn't the type to let this go easily." Michael stares at the message, feeling a chill run through him. He's no stranger to threats and intimidation, but this is different. This is personal. Johnson won't rest until he feels he's regained control, and Michael knows that his family is at the center of this twisted power struggle. The night is restless. Michael and Abby lie awake in bed, the silence between them filled with unspoken fears. They both know that their presence in this town has become a flashpoint, a catalyst for the simmering prejudice and hostility that lurks beneath the surface. Leaving now would feel like surrender, but staying might put their family at even greater risk. As dawn breaks, Michael resolves to take a stand. He's fought for the rights of others his entire career, and he won't back down now, not when his own family is in danger. He knows the path ahead will be fraught with challenges, but he's determined to show his children that they don't have to live in fear. The battle lines have been drawn, and Michael is prepared to face whatever comes next. The Evans family may be outnumbered, but they are not alone. They have allies, they have each other, and above all, they have the truth on their side. The following day dawns heavy and grey, with clouds rolling in over the small coastal town, casting a shadow that seems to echo the tension within the Evans family. Michael's resolve has only hardened, but he knows they're running out of time. He's prepared for a confrontation, yet there's a nagging fear that things will escalate beyond what even he's prepared for. Despite the support of David, the district attorney, Michael knows that Officer Johnson is unlikely to back down after being publicly challenged. That morning, Michael decides to take his family to the local community park to give everyone a brief sense of normalcy and fresh air. As they set up a picnic blanket on the grass, Tiana and Cameron run off to explore the playground. Michael and Abby sit quietly, watching their children play and trying to ignore the occasional stares from other park goers. The peace of the moment feels fragile, as if any minute it could shatter. Their calm is broken when two patrol cars pull up on the edge of the park, and Michael's stomach drops. He immediately recognizes Johnson, stepping out of the lead car with a grim expression, followed by Officer Reed, who looks visibly uncomfortable. Two other officers step out of the second car, standing a few paces behind Johnson as he strides toward Michael and Abby, with a look of determination mixed with something darker, a bruised ego, a desire for payback. Michael rises slowly, keeping his expression calm as he steps forward to meet Johnson. Abby stands beside him, her face pale but resolute, her hand resting protectively on Michael's arm. She glances over at Tiana and Cameron, signaling them to stay back, but Tiana, sensing the tension, edges closer, unwilling to leave her parents' side. Johnson stops a few feet from Michael, his hands resting on his belt, his stance wide and commanding. His voice is a low growl, filled with unrestrained hostility. "Mr. Evans." He begins, his tone dripping with condescension. "We're going to have to ask you and your family to come with us for questioning." Michael crosses his arms, his gaze steady. "Questioning for what, officer? We've done nothing wrong." Johnson's jaw tightens, his eyes narrowing with barely contained anger. "There's been a report of property damage at a nearby business. Witnesses say they saw someone matching your description in the area. We need to verify your whereabouts and ask you a few questions." Michael knows this is a fabrication, a thin excuse designed to justify detaining them. But he also knows that Johnson is willing to push this as far as he can. "You and I both know that's a lie," Michael says, his voice steady but sharp. "This is harassment, plain and simple." Johnson's eyes flash with anger. He steps closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Watch your tone, Mr. Evans. You're already in enough trouble." Michael stands his ground, refusing to be intimidated. "We're not going anywhere, not without a legitimate reason. You've crossed the line, Officer Johnson, and you know it." The tension between them is electric, a standoff that has attracted the attention of several onlookers in the park. People are beginning to gather, watching the exchange with a mix of curiosity and concern. Some pull out their phones, recording the scene as Johnson's face reddens, his composure slipping. At that moment, David Freeman arrives, having been alerted by Michael's earlier call. He steps out of his car, his presence immediately shifting the atmosphere. With his commanding stance and serious expression, David walks straight up to Johnson, positioning himself between the officer and the Evans family. "Officer Johnson," David says in a firm voice, "this has gone far enough. I've warned you and your department that the harassment of this family will not be tolerated." Johnson looks taken aback, but he quickly recovers, a sneer twisting his lips. "District Attorney Freeman," he says, feigning respect, "I'm just doing my job. There's been a report of a crime, and I'm following up on it." David's eyes narrow, his voice cold. There's no crime here, Johnson, except the one you're trying to fabricate. I've seen this family's whereabouts for the past few days, and they haven't been near any businesses. This stops now, or I'll make sure there's a formal investigation into your conduct. A flicker of uncertainty crosses Johnson's face, but his resentment and need for control override his better judgment. He squares his shoulders, doubling down on his authority. I don't take orders from you, Freeman. This is my jurisdiction. David steps closer, his voice steady but filled with an unmistakable warning. You may be the officer on duty, Johnson, but you answer to the law. And right now, you're violating it. Reed, who has been standing silently beside Johnson, shifts uncomfortably and finally speaks up, his voice hesitant. Maybe we should back off, John. It's not worth it. Freeman's right. Johnson glares at Reed, his face twisting with anger and frustration. For a moment it seems he might back down, but instead he lets out a low growl and takes a step toward Michael, as if trying to reassert his authority by force. But then something unexpected happens. Tiana, who has been watching the entire exchange with anger and hurt, suddenly steps forward, placing herself between her father and Johnson. Her voice, though young and unsteady, rings out with a powerful conviction that surprises everyone present. You can't do this to us, she says, her voice shaking but defiant. We have every right to be here. We haven't done anything wrong. Johnson stares at her, momentarily thrown off balance. The sight of this young woman, standing up to him so boldly, brings a flicker of hesitation to his eyes. But his pride won't allow him to back down, not now. Little girl, I suggest you step aside, Johnson says, his voice laced with menace. But Tiana doesn't move. Her gaze is steady, her voice unwavering. No, you've been treating us like criminals since we got here, and we're not going to let you scare us anymore. The crowd watching the confrontation begins to murmur, and more phones are raised as people record the brave young girl standing up to the officer. Some of the onlookers start calling out, their voices filled with support for Tiana. The momentum shifts, the crowd's murmurs growing louder as people realize the gravity of what's happening. Realizing he's lost control, Johnson takes a step back, his expression twisted with frustration and rage. He looks around, seeing the eyes of the crowd on him, judging him. In that moment, it becomes clear to him that any further action will only make things worse. Defeated, he finally steps back, throwing one last glare at Michael and his family before signaling to his officers to leave. As the patrol cars pull away, David turns to the family, a look of relief mixed with pride in his eyes. He places a reassuring hand on Michael's shoulder. You stood your ground, Michael. And Tiana, you were incredibly brave. Tiana smiles weakly, the weight of the confrontation settling in as the adrenaline fades. Michael pulls her into a hug, his voice filled with pride. You did well, sweetheart. You reminded us all what it means to be strong. The crowd begins to disperse, but not without offering words of encouragement and admiration to the Evans family. Strangers approach, shaking Michael's hand, thanking him and his family for standing up to the injustice. It's a small victory, but a powerful one, and it marks a turning point as they return to their rental house. Abby takes Michael's hand, her eyes filled with gratitude and love. We faced them, and we didn't back down. This is something our children will remember forever. Michael nods, his heart swelling with pride and relief. They came to this town as outsiders, and they were met with hostility and prejudice. But in the face of adversity, they found strength not just within themselves, but from the courage and resilience of their children who refused to let fear dictate their lives. The Evans family may have faced a storm, but they emerged stronger, more united, and with a renewed sense of purpose. And as they prepare to leave the town the next day, Michael knows that this experience has changed them all. They may be leaving, but they're doing so with their heads held high, knowing they stood up for their rights and their dignity. As they pack up and prepare to leave the next morning, Michael receives a final message from David: proud of you all. This will make waves. Safe travels. Michael smiles, feeling a sense of closure as they drive away, leaving the town behind. For the first time since they arrived, he feels a profound sense of peace, knowing that they've not only defended themselves but have also shed light on the injustices that still persist in places like this. The Evans family's quiet strength and courage have left a mark that won't be easily erased. As the Evans family drives away from the small town, the atmosphere in the car is a mixture of relief and quiet reflection. The last few days have been an ordeal they hadn't anticipated, and though they leave with their heads held high, the experience has left an indelible mark on each of them. Michael keeps his eyes on the road, but his mind drifts back to everything that transpired: the harassment, the confrontations, and the strength his family showed in the face of it all. Abby reaches over, placing a comforting hand on his arm, giving him a soft smile. Their connection, strengthened by their shared ordeal, speaks louder than words. In the back seat, Tiana and Cameron sit in contemplative silence. Tiana looks out the window, her expression thoughtful, still processing the courage she had to summon to stand up to Officer Johnson. Her heart swells with a newfound understanding of what her father has always fought for, of the sacrifices he has made for people who, like them, deserve respect and dignity. Cameron, though younger and less aware of the complexities, senses the change in his sister and rests his head on her shoulder. Tiana wraps an arm around him, feeling a deep sense of responsibility and pride. They soon stop at a gas station on the outskirts of town. As Michael fills up the tank, he notices a young man from the town approaching him. The man looks hesitant but determined, holding his phone in his hand. Michael tenses, half expecting another confrontation, but the man's expression is one of regret. "Mr. Evans," he asks, his voice low. I just wanted to say I'm sorry for everything you went through in town. A lot of us. We don't agree with what happened. Some of us are trying to bring change. People like Officer Johnson. They don't speak for all of us." Michael takes a moment, surprised by the apology. He nods slowly, extending his hand. "Thank you. I hope that things do change here. For everyone." The man shakes his hand, offering a small but sincere smile. "You've inspired a lot of people, sir. Just know that." As Michael returns to the car, he feels a renewed sense of purpose. Abby, seeing the shift in his expression, squeezes his hand as he sits down. Without words, they both know that their stand in this small town has already begun to ripple outwards, inspiring others to challenge the status quo and push back against prejudice. Several weeks later, back in their city home, Michael receives a letter from the district attorney's office. It's a formal update from David Freeman, detailing the investigation into Officer Johnson's conduct. The report confirms what Michael already suspected: the town's police department has been forced to undergo an internal review, with Johnson facing suspension. Several residents, inspired by the Evans family's courage, have come forward to report their own experiences of harassment, contributing to the case against Johnson and similar officers. The town's council has launched an initiative to address systemic issues within its institutions, a small but significant step toward justice. Michael shares the news with Abby, Tiana, and Cameron over dinner, their expressions a mix of satisfaction and quiet pride. For Tiana, hearing about the impact of their experience is transformative. She realizes that her family's courage has sparked real change, a lesson that empowers her as she begins to think about her own future. "Maybe I'll study law, too," she says, her voice filled with conviction. Like you, Dad, I want to help people. Michael's eyes fill with pride as he looks at his daughter, seeing in her the same fire for justice that has driven him his entire career. I think you'd be an incredible lawyer, Tiana. And if that's what you decide to do, know that I'll be with you every step of the way. Abby smiles at their daughter, her own heart swelling with pride. She reaches across the table, taking Tiana's hand in hers. You were all so brave, all of you. I've never been prouder of our family. The family shares a quiet, reflective moment, each of them feeling the profound effect of what they've endured and overcome. They've come through a storm together, emerging stronger, more resilient, and more united. As the days pass, Michael finds himself reinvigorated in his work, feeling an even deeper commitment to his cases. He realizes that the battle for equality is ongoing, and there are still many people facing injustices similar to what his family experienced. But now, more than ever, he feels equipped to face it, armed with the knowledge that his family stands with him and that their courage has the power to inspire others. Months later, he receives another letter, this time from a community advocacy group in the town they visited. They invite him to speak at a community event about his experience, hoping to bring further awareness to the need for accountability and systemic change. Michael considers the invitation, feeling the weight of the decision. After talking it over with his family, they all agree that he should go. His story, their story, could be a catalyst for continued change. On the day of the event, Michael stands before a packed room, with Abby, Tiana, and Cameron watching from the front row. He shares their journey, the adversity they faced, and the importance of standing up for one's rights, even when the odds seem insurmountable. As he speaks, he sees the faces of the audience shift from skepticism to understanding, many of them nodding in agreement, some moved to tears. When he finishes, the applause is thunderous. Michael steps down from the stage, feeling a sense of peace and fulfillment. Abby, Tiana, and Cameron embrace him, and in that moment, he knows they've made a lasting impact. The Evans family leaves the town once again, but this time they leave behind a legacy of strength and hope. The memory of their courage will endure, serving as a reminder to everyone in that small town and beyond that true justice is rooted not in intimidation or prejudice, but in the resilience and dignity of those who refuse to be silenced.